The next item of business is members' business debate on motion 21178 in the name of Elaine Smith on the 15th anniversary of the Breastfeeding etc. Scotland Act 2005. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons. And I call on Elaine Smith to open the debate for around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I say at the start I have a registered interest with funding from Unison, Boots the Chemist and assistance from the Govan Law Centre. I must also thank Emma Harper MSP for asking about the possibility of a debate on the 15th anniversary year of the Breastfeeding etc. Scotland Act receiving its royal assent. And we should also thank Emma for her decision to volunteer to help the NHS during this unprecedented pressure of coronavirus. This was actually the first private member's bill to pass in our new Parliament building here. And at the chamber stages of the bill, there were a number of breastfeeding mums and babies in the public gallery. Sadly, there are none today due to the circumstances, but of course, anyone interested can watch via our live stream. I could never have imagined that 15 years on from the Act, the world would be suffering from such a horrendous viral pandemic, which is not only a very real threat to life, but also has fundamentally changed normal life as we know it. At present, the advice to breastfeeding mums is that they should thoroughly wash their hands before breastfeeding, if unwell, should wear a mask whilst feeding or express for someone else to feed their baby. There's no evidence that the virus is passed through breast milk, and the current WHO guidance, which is frequently updated, reminds us that breastfeeding protects babies so mums can supply their own designer food to their babies. However, we should also be aware of the distressing reports of mothers desperately searching supermarkets for formula milk due to recent panic buying, and we should ask that people be considerate of the needs of others at this difficult time. Rather than rehearse all the reasons why breastfeeding is good for mums, children and society, I would like to outline the history of the bill and my hopes for the future, and I'm sure other speakers will want to cover health, local support groups and other issues. The initial idea and motivation for the private member's bill to support and protect breastfeeding in public came from my own personal experience. Breastfeeding my son Van showed me that society did not always support breastfeeding in public, with women being asked to feed in toilets, being stopped altogether, or simply fearing to breastfeed due to such attitudes. In fact, some desk-based research for the bill funded by Unison found, amongst other things, that fear of being stopped was a big influence on women's choice whether to breastfeed or not. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Kay Sillars, who did that piece of research work. In 2001, I was asked to speak at a Lanarkshire breastfeeding conference, and whilst researching for that, I discovered that Coatbridge had some of the lowest rates in Scotland, and since the country itself was amongst the lowest rates in Europe, that was extremely concerning. I brought the issue forward as a members' debate, which was the first time that the Scottish Parliament had debated breastfeeding. And of the 10 members and 1 minister who contributed to that debate, only 2 are still serving MSPs, and that's myself and DPO Christine Graham. During my speech, I mentioned the incident of a mum and baby put off a Lothian bus for breastfeeding on the bus. In responding, the Minister Malcolm Chisholm said, and I quote, "There have been many instances of hostile reaction to mothers who breastfeed in a public setting. Elaine Smith referred to the incident in Edinburgh in which we were all horrified to learn a mother was told to get off a bus because she was breastfeeding. Ministers wrote to Lothian Regional Transport as it was then, but under current laws we do not have powers to enforce anything on a bus company in that regard." So there it was. My challenge was to change the current law, to give the powers so that this appalling situation could not happen again. The Scottish Parliament unit that supports individual members in bringing forward legislative proposals initially ruled my idea out, giving an opinion that it was reserved as a matter for the UK Parliament. So, having a can-do attitude, I found a solicitor who was willing to help me write a bill for Scotland. Mike Daly of the Govan Law Centre deserves much of the credit for the protection that is now available to mums and babies, and also my thanks. We set up an advisory group, including trade unions, health sector, voluntary sector, police, business, and the National Breastfeeding Advisor to the Scottish Government at the time, Jenny Warren, was also a fantastic support. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank my office manager, Leslie Dobbin, who's worked with me actually for most of my time in office and has supported me and helped with her own breastfeeding knowledge and research on the subject over the years. Unfortunately, at the time, the presiding officer, David Steele, wouldn't grant the bill competency, so it fell at the 2003 election. I resurrected it the following session, and Mike Daly and I rewrote it to focus on children's health, and Presiding Officer George Reid approved it as competent for consideration by this Parliament. A lesson, I think, in how our devolved powers can be used creatively to deliver legislation that sometimes deliver legislation that we need. Then the hard work started, getting political support, giving evidence to committee and steering it through its chamber process. I was also lucky to gain the assistance of Susan Deakin, who'd actually been the Health Minister when I initially proposed the bill. Susan was a great help, not only with the process, but also with her knowledge, encouragement and personal support, and the majority of parties eventually were persuaded to support the legislation, with the exception of the Tories. But I must say I thank them now for supporting my motion and being here in the chamber this evening. UNICEF calls breastfeeding a public health imperative for which government, policymakers, communities and families all share responsibility. Unfortunately, although there have been increases, it is still not the norm, and society still falls down on the celebrating and supporting of breastfeeding. There's also concern that austerity and cuts to local government and health funding impacts on breastfeeding support. So it's vital that politicians like us lead the way in continuing to demonstrate the value of breastfeeding and support the promotion of it to not only improve health, but also impact on the family purse and the economy in general. It really is shocking that natural maternal feeding of hungry, thirsty babies, which benefits mums, babies and society as a whole, is still sometimes seen as unacceptable. One major issue influencing this is that breasts are sexualised in our society, and attitudes to breastfeeding are tightly tied to misogyny. Professor Amy Brown notes that the higher a man scores on sexist traits, the more he is opposed to women breastfeeding in public. The Breastfeeding etc. Scotland Act has played a part in changing attitudes, but women must also feel confident using the legislation. Whilst there are still reports of problems in public, the only case I am aware of involved a big retail store in Glasgow who disgracefully threw a mum, who was also a paediatric doctor, and her tiny hungry baby out of their shop and onto Sucky Hall Street. This was investigated and reported by the police, but the shop was merely given a slap in the wrist letter from the Procurator Fiscal. Breaches of this Act need to be taken seriously, as they can have a detrimental impact on mums and babies' health and well-being. Presiding Officer, education from a young age is vital in normalising breastfeeding, and I was pleased to learn recently that North Lanarkshire Council lesson plans on infant nutrition include children learning about breast milk and caring for a baby. Chief Executive Des Murray said of this project, "We strongly believe that lessons on infant nutrition at such an early age will help increase the number of mothers breastfeeding their babies in future years," and I wholeheartedly agree with this and encourage other councils to follow NLC's lead. The principle of normalising the feeding of babies in public, of providing legal protection for a baby to be fed where and when it needs, whether by breast or bottle, is what underpins the bill, which is now the Act. So, in conclusion, when I closed the Stage 3 debate on the 18th of November 2004, I said, if passed, the bill is not an end but the beginning of the Parliament pursuing practical ways to support and encourage breastfeeding. Although I am having the final word in this debate, I assure Parliament, the Minister and all those with an interest in breastfeeding that I will have much more to say on the subject during the rest of this parliamentary term, and I'm sure that many of my colleagues will too. Well, I have had much more to say over the years. I will continue to celebrate, support and promote breastfeeding when I can, and I ask other members to join with me in doing that too. Thank you.
Move on to the open debate. Speeches of around 4 minutes, please. Kenneth Gibson, followed by Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in this important debate and congratulate Elaine Smith on securing it and indeed all her hard work on this issue over many years. Elaine will know I've spoken in our debates and signed her motions on this important matter on a number of occasions, and I also wish to congratulate her on the 15th anniversary of the passing of the bill that she pioneered. However, I wish to make clear that I am not speaking for myself today, but for my colleague Emma Harper, who has been urgently called away. There is no doubt that this legislation has allowed mothers greater security and protection to breastfeed in public, as well as raising awareness of breastfeeding and its benefits to both mother and child. While not all mothers breastfeed for many different reasons, it's important that breastfeeding mums are supported with their choice, should they wish to do so. Breastfeeding provides immune system support for the baby, and skin-to-skin contact is an important part of breast and bottle feeding. Presiding Officer, when Emma was first elected, she met with Veronica King, the Health and Wellbeing Specialist, Maternal and Infant Nutrition Lead with NHS Dumfries and Galloway, who was originally tasked with leading the Breastfeeding Welcome Scheme. In 2018, Emma was at the formal launch of the scheme by NHS Dumfries and Galloway, which was well attended by mothers and interested parties from across the region, and she agreed to work with Veronica to raise awareness of the work being carried out with the aim of engaging with more businesses to sign up to the scheme. Emma wrote to all appropriate businesses and public spaces across Dumfries and Galloway, around 230, to make them aware of the work Veronica was carrying out and urge them to take part and achieve breastfeeding welcome status. While there has been some interest and a generally positive response, when Emma met with Veronica again just last week, it was pointed out that the number of businesses taking up the scheme could be significantly improved. We know breastfeeding offers considerable health benefits for both mother and baby, and it is important that the community supports a mother in her decision to give her baby the best start in life. University of Glasgow research indicates that many new mothers across Scotland give up breastfeeding because they feel isolated and embarrassed, and that may offend other people by feeding in public. And of course, that's what helped stimulate Elaine's bill all those years ago. We need to continue working to change this narrative and support business and the public to promote breastfeeding and take part in the local NHS board's various schemes which are free to participate in. For example, in Dumfries and Galloway, businesses can display a Dumfries and Galloway is breastfeeding friendly window sticker and scheme certificate once they've applied, so long as they can demonstrate that they offer an environment which allows mothers to feed without interruption or obstruction. By taking part in the scheme, mothers can distinguish if a business is an inviting one. This can increase repeat business and attract more mothers through word of mouth to mother and baby groups as more women attend. Emma is happy to continue to support such work and appeal to local businesses to play their part in achieving a breastfeeding-friendly Scotland. Presiding Officer, I would like to briefly mention the world-leading work which has been undertaken by the Scottish Government to promote breastfeeding-friendly practices. In June 2019, the Government published the Becoming a Breastfeeding-Friendly Scotland report. This identified 8 key recommendations which should be taken forward to scale up the protection, promotion and support of breastfeeding in Scotland. These recommendations have been welcomed by many stakeholders and local groups and developed through evidence-based research and engagement with mothers and businesses, and are being implemented by the Scottish Government in partnership. One issue, however, brought to Emma's attention is the need for greater promotion of breastfeeding in our rural areas, such as in our own home area of Dumfries and Galloway. I therefore asked the Minister to give assurances that rural Scotland is absolutely kept in mind when progressing these recommendations. And if I can revert to myself for a minute, as someone who has island communities and rural areas, I would also be keen to see that be prioritised. And indeed, of course, the Minister herself represents a large rural area. In closing, I again congratulate Elaine Smith on bringing this debate forward and encourage businesses in Dumfries and Galloway and across Scotland to take part in breastfeeding welcome schemes to support mothers who choose to breastfeed.
Call Alexander Stewart to be followed by Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to have the opportunity of taking part, and I'd like to congratulate Elaine Smith on securing the debate today. As we've already heard, 2020 is the 15th anniversary of Breastfeeding Act, which received royal assent on the 18th of January 2005. And I commend and I congratulate all mothers who decide to breastfeed their babies, because breast is best, as that campaign said, and that slogan was very much promoted in the past. And it should be a very natural thing for a mother to do, whether at home, in a public place or at work. And she should feel confident in doing that and the ability to do that. And I congratulate, as I say, Elaine, for ensuring that is the case. Most of the time, we don't even notice. Anyone who does, obviously, sees the situation. And that's how it should be. We shouldn't think of it being a strange situation. As many of us see that it is not always the case, that some people do feel uncomfortable, and that should not be the way that it's looked upon. Indeed, we've heard in the past, and breastfeeding networks have said that sometimes individuals stare, and it's not always because they disapprove. We heard from one mum who was feeding her baby, and an elderly couple were in the vicinity. And as they got up and became to come towards her, the mother was a little bit concerned about how that was going to be said. And the elderly woman just came over and said it was lovely to see a mother breastfeeding her baby, because she, as a woman herself and as a mother, had done that for her own children, and it brought back fond memories. Now, that's what we should be thinking of. Fond memories, good feelings, confidence. That's the area that we should be looking at. But unfortunately, Deputy Presiding Officer, some individuals have decided to make a fuss. And we've seen that passers-by, people have axed grind, or some people find the specific views on breastfeeding and they make them quite vocal and quite public. But we should ensure that it's quite the reverse, that we should all embrace that and we should support and encourage individuals. Yes, delighted.
Elaine Smith.
Thank you very much. I thank the member for taking an intervention. And I just wondered if the member might agree with me that actually educating at a young age may help very much to change these kinds of societal attitudes where people are not used to seeing breastfeeding perhaps as the norm, and therefore they take those kind of attitudes because of that kind of ignorance.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank Elaine for that intervention. And yes, I completely concur. It should be seen as the norm. It should not be something that is classified as something to hide behind or someone should be ashamed. It should be natural. It should be and it's up to all of us to ensure that we educate and ensure that individuals see that. So, you know, we've already heard, Deputy Presiding Officer, about the nutrition and the psychological and the bonding and all of that that breastfeeding can promote. And science has looked upon that, the well-being, the nurturing, that's all there. And we know that there's an amount that needs to be carried out. And today we've seen the ante and postnatal levels when mothers are going through the pregnancy, that is promoted. And that has encouraged and given women the confidence to ensure that as first-time mothers, they sometimes feel a bit anxious, a bit nervous about that. But it's important that they get that training and they get that encouragement, because that's why we have seen in some areas a remarkable increase in breastfeeding right across Scotland, and that should be welcomed. We must applaud those who take that on board and develop and continue to exist across our society. I feel that it's a travesty, Deputy Presiding Officer, that a quarter of breastfeeding women who provided feedback when they were asked about a survey indicated that they did feel at times concern about what might happen, and they were uncomfortable. And as Elaine Smith has indicated, that's exactly why we need the training to be looked at. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, I congratulate Elaine Smith on all she has done with her endeavours on this topic. She, by her deeds and by her actions, has achieved so much for individuals across this country, and that needs to be recognised, because breastfeeding is one of the most natural things that we do, and it should be celebrated in our society today. Thank you.
The last of the open debate contributions is from Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to join colleagues in thanking Elaine Smith and paying tribute to her for the work she's done over many, many years, and also tonight having the chance to gather in the chamber for something that is positive and truly a cause for celebration. And I've been taking some notes because it won't have escaped members' knowledge that I'm working on my own members' bill on period products, pre-provision Scotland, and I have recently passed stage 1. But when I embarked on that piece of work, I had no idea how challenging and time-consuming that would be. So when Elaine was paying tribute to her staff and the people who've helped her, it made me think about my own situation, and it also reminds me that it's really important that we have a parliament that is gender balanced wherever possible, but certainly if we didn't have women driving these issues, then we might not have this legislation, which is important by itself, but also the culture change that it brings. So there's no doubt that Elaine Smith's bill has played a huge role in the increased uptake of breastfeeding across Scotland and raising awareness beyond Scotland's boundaries too. However, you know, we have touched on the fact that across the UK and in Scotland, we continue to have some of the lowest breastfeeding rates in the world, and that's something that I've been acutely aware of in my own region. And in particular in Lanarkshire, where we see in areas of higher deprivation that breastfeeding rates are still low. But I am really encouraged by some of the progress that's being made and some of the efforts that are being pursued. And Elaine Smith touched on that in terms of North Lanarkshire Council. And I think the work that they're doing is really key in terms of education within our schools, within the curriculum about infant nutrition, but generally just about normalising this and really tackling some of the taboo around that and trying to get rid of that. Elaine Smith touched on some of the underlying sexism and misogyny that still presents barriers. But again, if you haven't seen other people breastfeeding within your family and your friend group, that lack of visibility also has an impact on some of your own fears. So I've just been reflecting on my own experience as a breastfeeding mum formerly. Elaine's bill received royal assent, I think, in 2005, hence the anniversary. My daughter was born in 2006. And amongst my immediate group of friends, not many of us had babies at that point. So my experience was in the main positive, but I think it's important to say that breastfeeding is not without its challenges. You do need good support from your midwife, from your GP, from your friends and family, and your employer if you have one. And I remember in my return to work, leading up to that, there was lots of discussion about where you might want to go if you need to express milk, and it was like pointing me to cupboards and things like that, which was making it all very stressful. So even though we had legislation at that point, there probably wasn't enough by way of policy in the workplace to make sure that every line manager knew their responsibilities and also knew how to make this less stressful for people. So I think there's a lot of good progress still being made. Elaine Smith has touched on the fact that we now, as a parliament and across the world, have to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the moment, I know that breastfeeding support groups, whether it's in Lanarkshire or elsewhere, provide that vital support for people. And if pregnant women and new mums are having to self-isolate, that's a network of support they might not be able to access. So I'd be interested to hear what the Minister can say about some of the work that government is looking at in terms of maybe online support, how we can ramp that up, and also in terms of the National Breastfeeding Helpline, which I know is really vital, and whether we can maybe divert some of the resources that might go to community groups if they can't meet to that helpline. But I think overall tonight is an opportunity to reflect and to celebrate and to recognise the importance of legislation, not just to change the law for the sake of changing the law, but also to change our attitudes and change how we behave as a society. But this is an opportunity to celebrate and thank mums and babies and the health professionals on the front line who help them every single day, and long may that work continue. Thank you.
And I'll call Marie Todd to respond to the debate for around 7 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll just begin by thanking Elaine Smith for tabling this motion to mark the 15th anniversary of the Breastfeeding Scotland Act. I'm very grateful to members for their contribution on this important matter. I'm going to begin by reiterating some of the advice that Elaine Smith gave at the beginning of the debate in terms of advice to mums who may be experiencing concern about the COVID-19 pandemic. Breast milk does provide protection against many illnesses, and there's no evidence, despite limited studies, but no evidence at all that mothers with the virus can transfer it to the baby. All new mums should be strongly advised to breastfeed or to express breast milk to protect their infants regardless of the COVID pandemic. And it is prudent at this time to advise new mums to limit contact with the wider public, particularly those who have premature or sick infants. And absolutely everyone who's coming into contact with a new family should be very careful about the hand washing guidance and coughing and sneezing. I'm very aware that babies are born into a family and community, but at this moment in time we do need to take specific precautions. You mentioned as well the challenges that some mums are having in accessing formula milk, and to give some guidance on that. If people are having difficulty accessing their usual brand of stage 1 formula, they can use any brand. They're all made to the same standard and you can switch between them. We are urgently trying to confirm through official channels that there will be a limit on how many tubs of formula can be sold at one time in order to preserve supplies for those who might be seeking them. So that's my public service message.
Elaine Smith.
Presiding Officer, I thank the Minister for taking the intervention, because I actually just wanted to make the point that members might not know, that the reason it's called the Breastfeeding Etc. Scotland Act is because it focuses on the children's right to be fed, so it also focuses on bottle feeding as well when mums and babies are out and about.
Marie Todd.
Thank you very much for that intervention, very welcome. So, children only get one go at childhood, and it's incumbent on all of us, whether we are parents, members of the public or politicians, to do what we can to get it right for every child, to ensure that children have a chance to flourish and improve their health and well-being. And as we are all very well aware in this chamber, breastfeeding plays a big part of improving health over the entire life course, and this government continues to promote, protect and support breastfeeding. Research is very clear that the greatest benefits for the mother and baby is gained through exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life. Breast milk provides a complete source of nutrition and contains a range of immunological substances that can't be manufactured. These support the development of the digestive and immune systems of a growing infant. A key benefit of breastfeeding is that it can happen anytime and anywhere. But for it to be effective, both mum and child need to feel relaxed. Any embarrassing interruptions can result in an upset mum and a crying, hungry baby. As the motion highlighted, a key finding from our survey was that mums' concerns about breastfeeding in public, embarrassment and negative public attitudes have been identified as some of the main breastfeeding barriers. And although our Breastfeeding Act protects the rights to feed a child without fear of interruption or criticism, legislation alone is not enough to ensure the support which needs to be in place to allow women to feel comfortable to breastfeed their baby in public. In June last year, the Minister for Public Health launched the Scotland-wide Breastfeeding Friendly Scotland scheme. The advantages of a national scheme are that there's a recognisable logo and staff training materials, so no matter where a mother visits, her breastfeeding experience will be the same. By signing up to the scheme, businesses and organisations can help show that they welcome and support breastfeeding mothers, informing their staff about why breastfeeding is important and how it is protected. It was great to hear about all the work going on in North Lanarkshire, and I was very pleased and proud to see that my own alumni, Robert Gordon's University, is a breastfeeding friendly campus. We are going to extend the scheme into early learning and childcare settings in schools. Of course we are. Our aim to normalise breastfeeding in all communities will begin by increasing the knowledge of our very youngest people as they progress through their school career. Breastfeeding rates across Scotland continue to rise. The latest statistics show that more than half the babies born in 2018-19 were being breastfed at their first health visitor visit. Focusing on our support to mothers to enable them to breastfeed for longer is also starting to emerge through the national statistics showing that 43% of babies born in 2018-19 were being breastfed at their 68-week review, and 32% of those were exclusively breastfed. That now represents the highest percentage of babies being exclusively breastfed at 68 weeks since recording began. But there is more to do. A clear demonstration of our commitment to supporting breastfeeding is the provision of an additional investment of £3.7 million over the past 2 years. Health boards and our third sector partners are carrying out breastfeeding projects and quality improvement initiatives. Our aim from this quality improvement work is to reduce the incidence of key feeding problems, particularly those which are associated with early breastfeeding cessation and clearly highlighted in the survey. Our ongoing commitment to the UNICEF Baby Friendly initiative includes providing more training for all staff and developing specialist training and skills. That supports a recommendation in the Becoming Breastfeeding Friendly report for national implementation of consistent, appropriate practice skills for all of those people who care for mums and babies, and which builds on the BFI core standards. I'm delighted that we've celebrated Scotland being the only country in the UK. Well, I'm not delighted, I wish the other countries did it too, but it's great that Scotland's leading the way to achieve BFI accreditation in 100% of our maternity units and health and social care partnerships. The Breastfeeding Network, National Childbirth Trust, of which I was an antenatal teacher for, and the La Leche League have also received funding for the expansion of peer support provision across Scotland. That makes clear our commitment to include the third sector partners in the work that we do. A review of peer support is underway, and the valuable work of peer supporters will be celebrated at an event later this year. Supporting the provision of breast milk for our very tiniest babies is crucial, and we are supporting mothers and staff here too. Neonatal staff will be able to attend an event later in the year where they hear from experts about how neonatal experience impacts on a baby and their family in the long term. Of course, we've also developed the donor milk bank. Presiding officer, for many years, Scotland has aspired to be a country where breastfeeding is valued and supported by our society, and where mothers can have the best breastfeeding experiences possible and continue to breastfeed for as long as they are able and want to. I hope that you'll agree that all of the initiatives, policies and investment I've outlined today will help us to realise that aspiration. Thank you.
That concludes the debate. This meeting is closed.